So, my name is Gitte, and if I had been speaking, I can do it in Danish very short. I er nok ikke i tvivl om, hvad for en landsdel jeg kommer fra, når jeg taler her. So this is one of the, I'm just illustrating that I'm from the mainland of Denmark, from very close to Skanderborg. That's where our company Kino Quality is, but actually I was here already. I'm a consultant working with test and test management and agile transformation, mainly with the focus of testing. So I've been working with testing for 28 years by now, and starting with actually I think a bit of a classic background for a tester back then. I came from the business. My background is I'm a corporal from the Royal Danish Air Force, and back then I was a specialist in a command and control system that NATO had. And at some point in time they needed to re-implement that, and Systematic in Aarhus were going to do the development of the client side. And by then I thought, I want to try something new, and I sent an application to them. Don't you need someone practical like me? And they did. So I stayed there for 17 years and been a part of their agile journey, plus something that might go in the other direction, their CMMI journey, until some years ago, around 2012, I started as a consultant in a small company called Gitte, that later merged with Capgemini here in Denmark. But now I am in a truly small company, because back in 2020, my former boss and I decided that it was time to try something new. So we started Kino Quality, and if you remember what happened in 2020, I resigned my job on February the 16th. And we started the company on April 1st, where everybody had been sent home with Corona. So that was interesting, but we survived. I have a lot of different passions. Other than the outdoors, I have a huge passion around testing. But in the later years, I've tried to say that maybe we should stop talking about testing and talking about quality. But then it occurred to me that every time I talk quality with someone, we don't talk about the same. So last week we had a morning seminar in our company, and I asked, so what's important in your organization? If you ask what is quality in the perspective of your company, what answer will you then get? And they had a lot of difference. I started out with saying compliance. Reason for that is that my current assignment is within pharma, so medical production. So compliance is quite important. But there were many different aspects. Some had the focus on, we need some effective business processes. They have to be able to do the same but faster, or security is essential, or maybe we need some performance. Maybe it's time to market that's important. So we suddenly very fast realized we don't have the same view on what is quality, because we are all sitting in different contexts. There's some formal definitions out there about quality. The traditional conformance to requirements, that's something we can verify as testers, yeah. But is that enough? Have you ever been a part of creating a system that fulfilled all requirements, but the user sort of said, nah? I once participated in a UAT in a military context. We had created a beautiful system, all requirements fulfilled. We had been at a review where the customer said, yes, the test cases match the requirements, you're good to go. We came in, we started the test up, we got operational users in from the Officers Academy. They sat down, began testing. And after 5 minutes, they got up, and pardon my French, they say, we can't use this shit. And then they left. They didn't come back. So we had to go home. And we had to work in several months, because the thing was, there had been a project team that had defined the requirements. But unfortunately, in that process, forgotten to talk with the business, with the end users. So we had complete conformance to requirement, but it wasn't fit for purpose. Then we can talk about degree to which a set of inherent characteristics fulfills requirements. Same. Meeting the customer's needs. Now we're beginning to look at the right direction, right? We're looking at the customer, we're looking at the user. Do they get what they need? But then again, there are many differences. If you look at the Japanese culture, I will not try to pronounce how you say that in Japanese. Believe me, I trained. I sat with Google Translate and said, so how do they pronounce it? Won't destroy a beautiful word by trying to pronounce it. But it is. The first one, the idea that things will work as they are supposed to. That's one aspect of quality. And the other one is the idea that things should have an aesthetic quality. That's, again, two different perspectives on the same solution. You could grab a standard. Some people love standards. ISO 25010 has a definition of quality, looking at two different perspectives. Do we talk about product quality, or do we talk about quality in use? At least they tried. You can discuss whether you agree on this, but at least they tried to think about quality in use. But when all comes to it, it's all about perspective. And no, this is not elephant carpaccio. This is just looking at the same thing from different perspectives. Because it completely depends on who you ask. Even though we are talking about the same solution. If I look at the solution that we are building right now in the company I'm supporting right now, as I said, it's pharma. If I ask finance, they will say that the most important thing is that they can trust the data. That there is effective communication of data and that data is trustworthy. If I talk with the people in logistics, they want to be sure that whatever we put in actually is under control and that it is and that there's an audit trail and that it's being supported so that we are sure about the compliance. If I ask QA, so we have a compliance thingy. That's the best word for it, a compliance thingy, because that's a new thing for me. I mean, I've been in testing for 28 years. This is my first attempt on pharma. Brand new world. Not necessarily for the good as a test manager, to be honest. Their focus is very much about compliance, right? Do we do it right? They talk about, do we do the right, when we talk about risk, and when I am as a tester talk about product risk analysis, and I want to do risk-based testing so that I test the most critical thing first. They talk about, then I should document the most critical thing most. But I don't mitigate it more by, no, that's a sidetrack. But again, they have another perspective. And then we have IT, they have a third perspective. So the thing is, it completely depends on who you're asking what quality really is. I like this definition. It's originally from Jerry Weinberg and then later enriched by James Park and Michael Bolton, saying that quality is value to some person at some time who matters. Because it really depends on your context. These guys are members and founders of the Context-Driven School, if anyone don't know the names. And there's some important words here. There's value. And there's some person who matters. And then there's an issue about time. Let's take a look at it. Value. Working agile. You of course know your Agile manifesto by heart. If I wake you up at 3 o'clock in the night, you can stand up and preside individuals and interactions over processes and tools and all that. Do you also know the 12 principles of Agile? Because many apparently do. Nah, you don't. As I sort of didn't expect you to. The funny thing is, the very first principle of Agile is that our highest priority is to deliver value. It is interesting that in spite of the fact that this is the very first principle we have in Agile, and to my humble opinion, the most important one, this is why we are there. That's why we're here. We need to make a difference from our users by delivering value. But even though that is the first thing, why is it that we so often focus completely and utterly on what we are making and how we are making it, and not why? Because value is something we need to talk about. And who do we need to talk about value with? These people who matters. So if you look in your own context, do you know who the people are who matters? Because that really depends on your context. It can be many different roles. There's of course an end user out there. If you are in a software delivery house, there will be a customer with a contract. End user, customer, not the same thing as my story just told you earlier, right? But there's also marketing and sales. There's also senior management. They are big stakeholders because they're sitting on the money. But there's also your team. Or what about operations? Operations have a clear idea about what value is, right? From their perspective, because that's a stable operation with silent support phones, where things just go smoothly. But that's not necessarily what the end user says, right? So you need to figure out in your context. And I mean, in traditional waterfall projects, a project manager would start by doing a stakeholder analysis, right? I'm a test manager. When I start in a new project or in whatever context I'm in, I always make a stakeholder analysis because I need to understand my stakeholders. But what if you're an agile team? Do you have that focus? Do you understand as a team who your stakeholders are? Who are your customers in the broadest of terms? It's really important that you know who they are, because you need to have a chat with these people. You need to have a dialogue with the people who matters about why they want this solution, why they want this project, why they want you to work this way. Because that should in any way direct the way you operate, the way you work, how you deliver. In TMAP is a method defined by a Dutch company called Society or Society. It's a test method. Now it's more an agile test method. With the last model, the last update, they are looking at quality engineering in the context of DevOps and agile. In that context, they defined the voice model. I like this model quite a lot. Now, the reason for that is it forces me to take that dialogue. Because whenever you start a release, an increment, you start up a team, if you are lucky enough to be in an agile release train under SAFe, I don't really care what context you're in, but in the beginning of something, you take this model and you start with the V. And you have a dialogue with your stakeholders saying, what is the value? Why are we making this solution? Why are we making this project? Why have you chosen that we are now going to implement, like the one I'm in now, we are implementing Dynamics 365. So we're not building something from scratch. They bought a COTS product that we are sort of squeezing into the normal day life of the company. Why? That's a really good question. But that is something you need to discuss with them. You need to figure out, why are we doing this? What do you want out of this? And they will give you fluffy answers. So why do we want this new payment solution? Or we want to be sure that no matter what type of credit card our customer comes with, he'll be able to pay in our web shop, just to take a standard classic. We'll do a web shop, everybody knows a web shop. But that's really, really fluffy, right? Therefore, you can start going through this. Let's take them. So objectives. Now I have a list of fluffy values, right? Sometimes they are so fluffy, we need to make them more concrete, more measurable. So we need to define them as objectives. The way you could do that is using questions. There's a method called goal question metric, where you actually say, so if that's the goal you have, if that's the value you're pursuing, what's the questions that you're going to ask me then to figure out whether I delivered, whether you actually got what you asked for? What questions would you ask me? When you get that list of questions, then you can figure out a way to answer them. And you do that with indicators or metrics. Call them what you like. I think they call them indicators because the M would be really dumb in voice. It's better with an I. So they call them, oh, no, they didn't. I think there's more behind it, but it could be fun. So it's an indicator. It's an indicator on whether we actually fulfilled that goal or not. And it can have different perspective. It can focus on the business value we are achieving. It can focus on the IT delivery. So how good are we at that? It could focus on the team. And I am not starting to measure individuals. I'm looking at how happy are we? How satisfied are we as a team? How well functioning are we? Are we enjoying being a part of this team? Or do we have some challenges that we need to talk about? But also, do we have the right skill set? And that's one of my passions as well, because I think I'm very sad to see that very often what I see in agile teams is a lack of knowledge about my craft, about my profession. Do we have the skill set so that we can do proper testing? Because testing is an issue. That's another value. There's another principle there. Working software is the only measure of progress. How do we measure if the software is working? We test it. But do we have the skill set to do that? Can we support? Can we answer the questions that we need to answer? Of course, the classical problems or bug stuff, we can do indicators about that. And we got to pick whatever's necessary to answer those questions. And I don't mean now we have a list of 55 different metrics and we are going to measure them 3 times a day-ish. No. I'm not trying to kill you with metrics. I'm talking about a handful, or maybe 2 handfuls, if it's a big project, if it's a big team, if it's a big solution you're working on, if there are many questions that needs answering. And some of it you won't be able to answer before very late. Because the thing is, what we want to do with those indicators is to tell the people who are going to decide on whether they are going to go live with this, whether we have confidence in the fact that we are delivering the value that they're expecting. You asked for this. This is sort of how it is. You can expect to get, if we take the credit card one, I'll get back to the credit card one in a second. But what we want to do here is we want to give information to the people who matters on whether they can have confidence. So we can tell our stakeholders whether our stomach feeling and a bit more structured that stomach feeling. Do we have confidence in our own solution? Do we have confidence in our release? Or are we doing the classical hit for going production and then dive and cover? Duck and cover? Is that the quality we deliver? Is that the value? We're running on vacation as soon as we put it into production, so we're sure that we're not home. We need to communicate about that. Do we have confidence in that? Whether it's automatic, I do prefer if I can make a dashboard so that I don't have to collect data manually. For 2 reasons. It's really, really boring to collect data manually. Plus, it's often flawed. The more automatic I can make this, the less risk is there that there are stuff going wrong when I collect the data. Why do I want to do it? Because I don't want my stakeholders to feel like this. I don't want my stakeholders to feel that they are standing on the edge of the cliff, blindfolded, not knowing when they're falling in, not knowing what it is that we're hitting them with when we go into production. I want us to be able to communicate that. What are the risks I still see? What are the issues that if we go in now and say we'll go into production now, what then happens? What could potentially happen? What are the risks that are still there? And I'm talking about risks towards the solution, product risks. to be able to do that, because then they can take that decision on an informed basis. But when it all comes to all, where we really find out whether that pursued value is there or not is when we experience it. When our solution is in production, when we can talk to the end users, whether they are feeling like that or whether they are feeling like that. And that also means that sometimes when you send things in production, they will come back and say, yeah, we sort of liked it, but it is missing this, this, and this. Fine. Then we have a feedback loop. New stuff that we're putting in the backlog, new value that we are going to build for our end users. But the more informed we're doing this, the better confidence we can give our stakeholders, the better. Don't let them sleep with the lights on in the night because they're afraid of what's going to happen. And when do we do it? It completely depends. You decide. You can do it when you start up a new project. Try to take that discussion on a principle basis. You can do it focusing on the solution, but you can also have that value talk about the way you're working, about your process. And I do know first line of Agile, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Then let's not call it process and just ways of working. The thing is, we do have process. Everybody works according to some kind of process. We just don't necessarily need a huge documented Bible to work from. But we have good patterns that we work after. We have skill sets and knowledge that gives us that process. So maybe when you start out a new system, implementing a new project, maybe every time, if you work in releases, I know Agile, putting things into production all the time, not always possible. I've been working on military systems most of my life. And if I'm working on command and control systems that are in the armored vehicle of an army, then I do not make continuous deployment. Because if they are in green zone somewhere, they don't want a new update on their software. So we do releases still. So we might do something you could call water scrumfall, right? We try to work agile-ish with the mindset and the values and the principles of Agile, but we are wrapped into some kind of waterfall because that is how our customer wants it. So in that case, maybe I have an increment, 3 months increments. Let's have a talk about what is the value we want out of this increment. Maybe down on the feature. Why is it I keep talking about that value? Because that's our why. And we should always start with why. Understanding our why. Rather than starting with figuring out what we're building, start figuring out why we're building it. Because then we might find out that we are not we are not having the right thoughts. Maybe there's another solution that would be much better if we are focusing on the why first. So this is just an example. I was starting on it. So that's the credit card example, right? So you would have the goal, the value we want to give our customers the possibility to pay their orders using a credit card. Try to ask some questions. What type of credit cards do you want them? Get that information. That's the objectives. That's what we are supposed to be able to handle. And maybe also a question about, do the customers leave because they can't pay with the favorite credit card? The last one, can we make an indicator for that during development? No, of course not. And then again, could we maybe make a survey to our customers? We are building a new component for payment. What is your prepared ways of paying? I want this card, this card, this card. Getting an indication of, are we actually supporting the right kind of cards here? Measuring that. Being able to say, so okay, by now, if we go into production tomorrow, we'll be able to support these 4 sets, but we can't support that tool. We can't support American Express. Doesn't matter too much. Not many European uses it. We're good. And then when we go into production and we experience it, then we see, do the customers actually require, do they ask for other credit cards? And if they do, we have a feedback loop. We have a thing for our backlog. But at least we're focusing on, when we measure, when we test, we focus on what is that value that we're going to supply. And then it's time dependent, because the thing is, the world is not static. You can't define a set and say, so this is our values. We will always have these 5 values. Because the thing is, it depends completely on time. You remember that there's a 4-letter abbreviation that were very in, starting with a G and a D and a P and an R, GDPR. That was very much up in time some years ago, right? We needed to focus about that, everybody, because that was huge money to lose if we weren't compliant. So that would have been in the top. Now we implemented it. We have been checking. We are compliant. Now that's not the focus anymore. Now we're moving in another direction. So that the value that we're pursuing will change over time. So we can't do this once. We need to go back and talk about value repeatedly. And then what? Because all this is very fluffy, this is very high level, this is on releases and projects and systems. What about in your daily job, in your daily work down in the team? You need to understand the needs of your customer. You need to understand your business. Whenever you're building a new feature, whenever you are trying to describe a new user story, it's called a user story for a reason. Because there's users on the other end. Start with why. Don't start with writing a list of functionalities. Start with understanding why we're going to build this. And then find ways to help them describing it as efficient and effective as possible. Because we also have working software over comprehensive documentation, but it doesn't say we don't document. Agile Manifesto doesn't say it's not against documentation. Working software is just way small. We document what has value, what is needed, what could be needed. What if you could help your users, your business, define the user stories and acceptance criteria and foundation for what you're building in an effective way without a lot of words, with drawings, with illustrations? Then you could maybe learn something from someone like me, from a tester. I forgot a very important question. Are there any testers in the room? Now I could argue that if you are working Agile, everybody should have their hands up. Everybody tests in Agile, but we have 2 professional testers, or what we call them. I don't know the terminology, the titles in your company, but that's the thing is, we as testers have something in our toolbox that can help proactively. We've used them always, or at least the professional testers do. They use your test design techniques. But if you stop talking about them as test design technique and rather start talking about them as something that can model, that can illustrate, that can visualize what is the needs, what is it that we are going to build, then we can help creating that value. This is just equivalence partitioning and boundary value analysis. Every time you work with data, you do data validation. You would use these 2 design techniques, and you do it. You might not know they're called that, but you do, because you know as developers that if you have a validation rule, then there's something with larger than and smaller than and equal and stuff, and you know that the boundaries there, that's always the interesting stuff. That's where we find the bugs, because as a developer once said, both things are on the same key in the keyboard. So if I forget to press shift, then I write it turns the wrong way. This technique will help you find that bug. But if you do it proactively, then maybe you could have that as a dialogue with your customer. So now you say, we are going to build this dialogue, we are going to build this page with all these fields in. How are we going to define the data validation in there? What are the rules? That's one technique. My favorite is I need to understand the processes. We always support a workflow, right? If you are working with, for example, in the ERP system that we are building, we have 132 different business processes. And we need to understand them because our software needs to support their ways of working. So illustrating it in classic data flow diagrams, saying, okay, so we have some We have something we have to remember. We have some questions, some uncertainties about these different actions. There's a decision point. Okay, there's a decision point. Why is there only... There's something's missing here, right? Let's have a discussion. What is it you're deciding here? What don't I understand in your business flow right now? We have defined all our business processes like this. Not with page up and page down in Word, but as data flow diagrams with activities and decisions. The major advantage about that is then that afterwards, I actually have a design technique that makes it possible for me to very fast define what are the test cases that we're going to write to support the testing of the entire workflow. But proactively, it makes me understand what is the workflow, what is the business process that we're going to support. And that's highly important if we're going to make an implementation of a workflow in a system. Then we got to understand it. And mostly, we need to understand these ones, right? And these are the ones we forget. These are the ones that get missed. Number of war stories I have where we are missing directions out of a decision point are not few. Had we done this proactively, we would have figured it out up front. What about business rules? There's so many business rules in our systems. In my former assignment at Vestas, we had a huge set of business rules around the treatment of raw material for blades, for wings. You cannot call them wings, that's blades. And they made a huge document, 10, 15 pages in Word, just describing this business rule. And people were like, bloop, 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 bloop. I have no clue what they're writing, we don't understand it. What we did was, we made a decision table, read the input, defined the input as a decision table, sitting down, discussing. So, okay, so if that's the input, what is then the output? How should the system respond if you do that? Understanding, illustrating the business rule like this rather than in 20 pages of Word document. The dialogue together, a developer, a tester, and someone from business sitting together doing this is immense. It was so good. And we made a much better implementation because we got a common understanding of what is the set of business rules that we actually need. And actually, as it turned out, as I showed them that as we tried to put those 20 pages into the decision table, it was really difficult, that there was stuff that might actually be wrong. We found bugs with it. I love use cases. But every time I see a use case, the first thing I do, I draw it. I need to draw it because I'm a visual person. So I had a collaboration with the business. They wrote the use case because that was how they preferred to work, and I liked it very much because it took the focus away from the system and the focus into the user instead. And then I drew it because as I was drawing the process diagram that I could identify based on the use case, I found stuff missing. So I reviewed their stuff, ensuring that what we actually got as an input from them as what they would like had a better quality. So now I'm talking a little bit about shifting left. I'm talking about building quality. I'm just trying not to use those two sets of buzzwords because they are buzzwords. But the thing is, there are so many different things you can do to support that we are actually delivering value. One thing is, you got to figure out what the value is. You have to figure out who those people who matters are. Who are your stakeholders? You need to talk with them, figuring out what are their expectations. Why do they want this solution? You have to figure out how can we measure that. Follow up on whether we actually implement that value. And then you got to remember that value changes over time. It is not a set that we define once and for always, because what has value for your stakeholders today is not necessarily the focus they have tomorrow. And then in your day-to-day work, start focusing on why if you don't do it already. There is a reason why we call them user stories. And I do know they are difficult. I do know it's hard to make good user stories, and I do know that those first ones is a placeholder for a conversation, and then we need some acceptance criteria. We can define them as test scenarios. We can use Gherkin. You can do whatever you want, however you want to do it. The main thing is that you do it. That you, as a team with your business, have a dialogue so that you do understand what you're building. Then there's a bigger chance that what you deliver is actually what they asked for. And that is nice, isn't it? Thank you.